Welcome into the Blurred Wire. Today we are how did you describe it? We're committing the cardinal sin today.
Yes, we're committing the cardinal sin of the internet, and that is talking about Star Wars on the internet.
Yes. Because we are talking
Um,
about the Acolyte.
because no matter what we say today, there will be some Star Wars fan who wishes us dead.
I'm like, there might be some that agree, there might be some that hate it, but yep, I think that's like the most divisive fan base, I think, on the like out of anywhere. Because I think
I
like even MCU fans, like a lot of them are mostly done, but they're not really divisive. Some people are like, I'm gonna stick with it, and other people are like, nah, man, I'm out.
genuinely, I think it's something that because I grew up on Star Wars, I loved
Mhm.
Star Wars as a kid. I genuinely think the fan base is something that has made me dislike Star Wars as I've grown up. Like I've gotten out of it because it's such a toxic place to like be
Yeah.
around in discourse. Like even in person, like people get way too impassioned and like I hate you
Yeah,
over
it's
Star
like
Wars, and it's
again, like if you didn't like a Marvel movie, it's like, oh, okay, I actually kind of liked it. It's like if you didn't like a Star Wars project or if like you thought it was bad, it's like, you're horrible. You deserve to die. You don't know Star Wars. I'm just like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that my life was on the line here. Didn't realize you had a lightsaber in your pocket or something like
like
that.
I
Oh,
like it's not that much to me, man. It's
just
just a
how I feel.
movie. It's
I
just a
mean,
movie
it's like,
or a
are you
show.
trying to force choke me right now because I said I didn't like that episode? And I feel like some of them would. But again, it's like I can't talk like whenever I talk about the Star Wars fan base, like I'm talking about myself because like I will sit and I will take in every piece of Star Wars content that comes out forever.
Mhm.
Like I am a part of that fan base. I have watched literally everything that Star Wars has put out, as well as I need to get more into like reading some of the Legends books and stuff because that would be
Mhm.
really cool. But I think it's like a lot of the fans that get into the Legends and the different eras of the Star Wars universe.
Mhm.
Um, those are the more intense ones. So we're going to talk about the Acolyte.
Mhm.
Um, like you said, especially with this TV show, it's been very hard to talk about it on the internet because it feels like you have like two warring ideals, and like one side is like the show is terrible because it's woke and it's part of the woke agenda, and that makes it horrible. And then you have the other side that's like people only hate it or don't like it because they're racist and sexist and hate diversity and because they hate wokeness and they're terrible people and that's why they don't like it. And it's like, I would like to offer a new perspective where we're actually going to talk about the show and not whatever culture war is going on between it. If that's okay with everyone who's listening, because from what I found on the internet, like it's super hard to find like actual reviews of the show, like talking about tone, pacing, writing, acting performances. It's like, let's talk about the actual TV show. And so you and I got to talk about it a little bit. So we'll go right in because you just saw the eighth episode yesterday. So what's your overall, after getting the whole big picture of the Acolyte, what is your overall feeling about it?
I think it's solid. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's I think it's good. It's not great. It's not amazing. It's certainly not bad. There's some really interesting things going on. I really enjoy that it is completely separate from anything else
Mm-hmm.
in like the Star Wars canon. It just kind of exists as its own thing, and it does something interesting to me, which is kind of try to critique the Jedi Order and their philosophy and how it impacts the world around it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be through like some systemic outreaching of the issue or as people individually interpret the kind of like Jedi code. And so I found that to be interesting, but I think the the overall like pacing and some of the some of the lore that was thrown out, it just feels a little all over the place, a little too
Mm-hmm.
messy for it to be
Messy is the right
cohesive.
word. Yeah.
We when we were talking before I'll let you bring it up, but you had a really great way to explain like this show.
I did. Was it when I was talking about Soul or what when I was talking about
I really should have prepared you for this. I'm sorry, that's a messy segue.
No,
Uh,
I'm
it
trying to
was
think of it too because I said something I really liked as well. But
well, you had compared it to it doesn't feel like a TV show per se. It's instead.
oh yeah. Yeah. So I think that's the thing with Disney right now, and they they're trying to take their big movie making franchises and turn them into TV, which makes a lot of sense because Disney started off as just TV, like Disney Channel. They should know how to make TV shows. And in some ways they've proven that they can with The Mandalorian. They took their big Star Wars movie franchise and turned it into a very successful TV show in The Mandalorian. And the third season fell off for a lot of people, but overall the show's been great. The first two seasons were great, and it had a very episodic format. Something happens in the episode, it feels like a completed story, even though it's
Mhm,
telling an overarching story. That's
mhm,
how TV works.
mhm,
But in a movie tells a story over the whole, um, runtime. And Disney right now is making 6 to 8 hour movies and expecting people to consume them like TV. They're
mhm,
doing it with the MCU and they're doing it with Star Wars. And I think that's partly why the Acolyte feels so messy
mhm.
because they're choosing random points to end the episodes. The episodes aren't the same length. It doesn't feel like cohesive ways that they're ending each episode. They're just kind of like, okay, we have to explain what happened here. So like you have episode 5, which was this explosion of action and incredible pace and some of the best choreographed lightsaber fights I've seen in a long time. I'm just saying, it was fantastic. Definitely by far the best episode to me. Um, and it's sandwiched in between all of these slower, lower paced episodes where you have to spend so much time explaining what just happened and what's going on. And it's like, again, it doesn't feel cohesive because it's not a thing that they're trying to tell a whole story over these 8 episodes. And when you're releasing it week by week, it changes up the format. It's like you would never go into a movie theater and watch the first 30 minutes of a movie and then make a review right then and be like, if this movie sucks or this movie is terrible or I don't know what's going on. And it's like, well, you only watch the first 30 minutes of the movie, so you can't really review the whole thing. And that's
Mhm.
why we chose not to do an episode by episode review of The Acolyte because it was like, I feel like I'm not going to be able to review it until we get to the end. Like one of the
Right.
biggest things that I couldn't mention to you yesterday is how episode 5 revealed a huge plot hole because Chimera straight up said, I'm a Sith. I'm a Sith Lord. Like, you might call me Sith. And it was like, the Jedi have thought the Sith have been extinct for a millennia. And you're saying 100 years before Phantom Menace, the Sith, they discovered the Sith. But then
Well,
in
no,
episode
he, he
8,
he wasn't saying that he is a Sith.
well, he's saying you might call me Sith.
He said you would call me Sith, but as like you don't have the vernacular to call me what I am.
Right, right. But in a Phantom Menace, the Jedi made it sound like we haven't heard the term Sith in a millennium. Like
Mhm,
if the Jedi knew about what Chimera was doing, when they discovered Darth Maul, they would have been like, oh, kind of like that guy back on whatever planet that was, who slaughtered all those Jedi. He called himself a Sith. Like this might be connected, because he literally called himself that. But then in episode 8, we get the explanation that I guess Vernestra somehow covered it all up, blamed it all on Soul, and we'll have to
mhm.
see how that plays in because it appears like she's gonna tell Yoda. So I guess she and Yoda are the only ones that are gonna know. So that kind of thing. Because people were talking about wow, that's a huge plot hole and how it doesn't really fit. But again, you don't find out till episode 8, but it doesn't come out till 3 weeks later. So you have this narrative that you're trying to rationalize. I think it's just a big mess with what Disney's trying to do with their content because they won't release everything at once. I think this show needs to be binged. You need to watch it all back to back. Stretching it out over 6 weeks, the story's just not episodic enough or interesting enough to hold your attention for 6 weeks. I mean, I will because I'm a Star Wars fan. So like
Hmm.
there's no question if I'm going to watch it or not. The question is
Hmm.
when am I going to see it? But I think that's what's for a lot of their content, I think it's negatively affecting it. And because I don't think The Acolyte is terrible. I think binging it is makes it a lot better. There's still some pacing issues, and there's still a lot of like issues with questions and like things that we don't understand that are never really explained. Like, I don't know if you felt like you got a better explanation in episode 8, but I'm still like, why were the Jedi on Brendok in the first place? Like, what made
Investigate.
them come
Yeah.
there? So they were investigating the Force
The
cult,
the Virgins.
the
But
Virgins.
what exactly that is feels underexplained.
Right.
And I mean, it's a little late to throw this out there, but big spoiler alert, we're talking about everything. In this episode, we're talking about the
Oh,
finale and everything.
I might go back
Um,
and add this in. So first of all, major spoiler alert for the Acolyte. Oh, I
oh,
can re-edit it and put it in towards the beginning. But
okay.
major spoiler alert for the Acolyte. We are going to be talking about everything. So if you've not seen it, if you would like to see it, I strongly recommend watching it before seeing it because there's no way we can review this without spoiling it. So now
I
we'll jump right in.
okay. I think I mean I like that by the end it felt like they were talking more and maybe it's just really quickly explained. The problem is for me that they don't really explain why that is a big deal, why the Virgins is a big deal for them to investigate. What are the implications of that for the Jedi Order? All of that feels very underbaked. And
Mhm.
so, like, the crux of why everyone is here feels underbaked, and it just leaves it all feeling so convoluted. It's
Exactly.
like we have to
Yeah.
get to this point. Same thing with Osha and May being the same person, born
Yeah.
of the. It doesn't feel like what do you gain from that? I feel like the show did not explain why that is something like to be at awe with. Like, I think it's like an interesting concept, but I don't feel like it did anything with it. If you take away that and just make them twins, it does the exact same thing narratively. So
Mhm.
why have this convoluted thing just kind of added on top? My guess is maybe because all of this obviously takes place before like the whole prophecy of Anakin or Luke, coming to be. And so perhaps it's like a little, a nugget of information of how the Force can be used to
Create
birth
life.
life, to create life, just like how Anakin was born from the Force,
Hmm.
potentially from like Palpatine's influence or something. Uh, but like maybe that's what it has to do. But the show by no means gives us any clue as to why that's important, why that's a big deal,
Hmm.
why we're here. And it just feels sloppy when some of the more interesting moments of the show for me rest on this conflict.
Right.
Like
And
go ahead.
they gave us one hint, and it was a very
Oh,
blink and you miss moment in episode
oh,
8.
what was it?
So Darth Plagueis appeared, who
Yeah,
was
he was like
Sidious's master, hiding
curling
behind
up.
the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like a lot of people are theorizing that like did he create the twins as like an experiment on creating life, and then Sidious created Anakin as an experiment on life, because that's really an interesting concept, especially if like what if the prophecy of the chosen one was planted in the Jedi by the Sith, you know what I mean, as like a
Hmm.
way to help kind of control them and make them think that like they've got this it's almost like Dune, like how like the Bene Gesserit planted this prophecy about the Lisan al
Hmm.
Gaib, and then the Fremen people just became completely enamored with it. And like
Hmm.
that's actually really interesting if the prophecy of the chosen one actually came from the Sith and was their attempt to control the Jedi and lead to their defeat, because that's actually extremely interesting.
Right.
And I think would be a really cool concept. But again, showing Darth Plagueis peeking out of a corner doesn't connect all those dots. And like they probably want a season 2 to maybe connect them, But it also
Right.
felt like in their season one, they were like, let's answer every mystery with a mystery. Like it was like
Yeah.
you're wondering why the Jedi are on Brendok. Here's why.
So
Because
are
the
we.
twins are actually yeah, it's like we actually never figured that out. It's like so while you're wondering if the Jedi are on Brendok, actually the twins are the same person, the same consciousness split in two. And you're like, that's not the question I need answered. I
Hmm.
don't need to know that they were split. I need to know what the Jedi like because like in Tales of the Jedi, it showed a lot about what the Jedi do. They kind of act more like almost like like an additional police force for the Republic. There's like a scene where Count Dooku and his Padawan are on a planet and the senator is having a disagreement with his people. They like kidnapped his son. They have to go investigate. Even like um the Phantom Menace showed more about what the Jedi, kind of do, even though like Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of felt more like glorified mailmen, messengers, just like traversing across the
Hmm.
galaxy. They didn't really do a whole lot. But it's
Right.
like I feel like the Acolyte could have benefited from us like learning, hey, the Jedi are investigating this, or because like there was already so much animosity between the Witch Coven and the Jedi
Hmm.
like when the Jedi arrived. And it was like no one seemed surprised by that. You know what I mean? It's like the Jedi, it's like they knew that when they got there, there was going to be like distrust. Like they didn't trust the witches and the witches didn't trust them. And it's
Hmm.
like, but why? I need a reason. And he was like, oh, they're witches. It's like Night Sisters? No, they're not like Night Sisters. And like, I'm sure they probably felt like that helped, but it's like, okay, that just tells me what they're not. That doesn't tell me what they are. So I
Right.
feel like it's just like because and it is kind of like a mystery thriller genre, but like the best mystery shows don't just add more mysteries until because like that's what makes
Hmm.
everything so convoluted. So yeah, yeah.
I think like to that point, I really feel like the tension between them kind of ties into what I really enjoyed about the show, and it feels like it's the critique of the Jedi as like as a system, whether they exist as this like military force or they exist as this religious group, and they kind of exist as both, as a
Hmm.
political entity, as a religious entity, and as a military entity. They're kind of all of these together as an attempt to maintain control over people and over um, emotions, like they said in the final episode. And so I think the the whole thing with the Coven and with the Jedi is just through that control. The Jedi want to control Force users throughout the galaxy. That's their thing. They want to keep Force use in line as like we got to protect from anyone trying to rise up to become a Sith. We have to control that. We achieve the light side by domineering and by domination in that sense. And the Coven just wants to be left alone. They just want to practice their force powers on their own, separated from the Jedi. And then the whole crux of the show is that the Jedi force themselves in and kind of enact their own morality and their own form of what should be on them without ever trying to understand or
Hmm.
see where they're coming from. They act on assumption. They act on their own standard of what should be, without any attempt to try to empathize or understand the coven as they are, because we see in the way that the mothers act with, say, the children, because we don't get to see them too much, but it is a very loving relationship that she has with their children and preparing them for life. But yet when we get the second flashback episode and we see it from the Jedi's perspective, they just see these snippets and they take it to assume that these children are in danger. It's not clearly spelt out to us necessarily whether the force use is dangerous to anybody or not, and that I think is a problem for the show, because it doesn't feel like one of those things that like in its vagueness, it ties in with like the themes of why are you acting, without trying to understand. You're
Hmm.
pushing your your thoughts onto others. I don't think it's one of those. It just feels like a poor explanation at the end of the day. But that's what I get from it. And I
Hmm.
enjoy that, like all of it kind of held up by the character of Master Soul being the
Yes.
one who kills Osha and May's mother.
Hmm.
And like that revelation being the thing that convinces uh Osha to like use, I'm assuming the first time on like in the Star Wars universe using a force choke, because it was never, the way they built it up to me feels like it could be like the first time a force choke has been used, or at the very least the first time in centuries or
Very long
millennia
time.
that
Yeah.
this technique has been used.
Because
um
Chimera didn't even do that.
right, and they keep saying like you have to learn to kill without a weapon, and like the vagueness of that, and then she like grabs it. Very cool sequence. I love
Yeah.
that. But like I enjoyed Master Soul because of that, because he sat
Hmm.
as this like this pillar. It's messy in the way that it's handled, but that's like the core nugget that to me made the show interesting, because it was actually attempting to say something. It just did it in the messiest and like a really like, oh, if this was written better,
Yeah.
if this was like,
Hmm.
if each episode felt like they actually ended at the exact time they needed to, like if it felt like everything was just better, this could be really great Star Wars. And
Yeah.
I think because of all of the messiness of it being a Disney show as well, because it's
Hmm.
not just Star Wars, it's also, like you said, like a Disney show. And because it's a Disney show, that's what's keeping this from being something more interesting and engaging.
But tone wise, yeah. And I think it's like also, like you said, all of that about the Jedi kind of inserting themselves, all of that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for Star Wars, like for most Star Wars fans, the Jedi, you don't like you can critique them, but like they're heroes. Like at the end of the day, like the Jedi's are the good guys. And that's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
whole narrative behind it. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the default setting for most Star Wars fans.
Mm-hmm.
Jedi, good.
Good.
I want to see the Jedi slice the bad guy.
Right.
That's the agreement. That's what I want to see. And so in this so like you kind of have to understand that if you're writing the show. Like if you're writing the show and you're like, okay, I want to depict the Jedi in a different light. Like most people just see them as like heroes, and I want
Mm-hmm.
to show them doing something that's not heroic, or something that's should be critiqued, something that, they're going to a planet and basically taking these children because they feel like they should.
Mm-hmm.
But that's I think where the confusion comes in, because we didn't get enough explanation as to why it feels like they're doing something that's very out of character for Jedi, because
Mm-hmm.
like we as the audience have no reason to believe that a Jedi would go to this planet that's not in the Republic. First of all, like we have no idea that the Jedi would operate outside of the Republic, but they would go to
Mm-hmm.
this planet that's not in the Republic. And like even when Carrie Moss's character was talking to the Witch Coven, she was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, um, we Jedi are in the Republic," and they were like, "Well, Brendok isn't in the Republic," and like in theory, that should have been like end of conversation. Oh, you're right. Goodbye. Like we have no jurisdiction here because it's not the
Mm-hmm.
Republic. That's what the Jedi do, and so I think just getting something that tells us that like Vernestra sending them on this mission or being like, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is a dangerous Force cult. We need you to investigate and report back to us."
Mm-hmm.
And be like, oh, are we telling the Senate? No, we're not telling the Senate because technically they're not in the Republic. Something that gives us a reason why the Jedi are doing something that seems so out of character, because
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of us, it just kind of looks like confusing because it's like, we don't know why you're here. And you also don't seem like you know why you're here because your
Mm-hmm.
responses aren't really addressing the issue of like why you're there in the first place. And like how you mentioned how that kind of, and like Master Soul gets like absolutely obsessed with they're dangerous and we got to rescue these girls.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire time I'm just thinking, why? Like I haven't seen anything. Like even if we could have shown like a mission maybe where a Jedi did something similar and they were able to like maybe not even defeat like a dangerous force cult. Just I need some kind of reason why they are so, I guess for lack of a better word, anal about this. Because like you
Right.
mentioned,
Well, I think the in show explanation there is that he wanted a Padawan, but he hasn't been approved to have a Padawan. But he like Soul is desperate to have a Padawan, and like
and it's
that's
gotta be this one. Like there's no other options out of the thousands of kids in the galaxy.
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah. No,
it's worth
I
killing
get
her
you
mother
there.
to
I
have.
I get you
Yeah.
there,
Yeah, it's
but
kind of one of those things that's like you're telling us a lot. Like, my brother and I talk about all the time. Like in movies, you can tell someone something or you can show
yeah.
them something. So instead of telling us that, like, oh yeah, Soul is a respected Jedi, who kind of gets obsessive over these girls, it's like, show us why. Like, show us either like why he's such a respected Jedi.
Mhm,
Maybe show him taking down a Force cult. Maybe that Force, like taking down a Force cult, but he loses his Padawan when he takes them down or something like that.
mhm,
And that way we'll have an understanding of like why he just automatically goes, nope, if you're not a Jedi and you're using the Force, you're dangerous. And like, because like for
right.
us as an audience, it's not that hard to understand. But again, it makes the characters' motives for what they're doing um it would actually give us a reason for their motives, especially because you're changing our perception of the Jedi so much. That's the
Mhm,
main thing, is because like again, if the Jedi were already and like they're kind of side-eyed in the Phantom Menace, but not even close to the way the Acolyte depicts them. The Acolyte is
mhm,
going in a whole nother path. And it feels like the showrunner is just kind of like, yeah, I'm just gonna show the Jedi like this. And it's
mhm,
like, I understand what you're trying to do, but you also have to make it make sense to what people currently know about the Jedi. Because sure, this is a prequel series.
mhm,
So like maybe the Jedi reformed and got better since then. Like maybe they were bad back then, and over the 100 years, Yoda decided to enact some reforms where we don't go to planets and just take kids against their will.
mhm.
But for the Star Wars fans, like we just kind of need a reason why these Jedi are acting like this. Because again, to me, it seemed out of character. And that's
So
why it kind of led to a lot of confusion.
if I may, that is something that I actually enjoy about this show because I think it uses that assumption that Jedi are good,
Hmm.
enemies are bad. It's something that I find very very boring and like I find it to be bad storytelling to rely on such strict like good bad because
Hmm.
it's life is not like that. Like
It's
I
not.
think when you have hero, it should be heroes and villains because heroes and villains are both flawed people or groups. Okay,
Hmm.
there's not a like pure moralistic like good. And I find that Star Wars has existed too strongly on the like moral high ground of good and moral low ground of evil before with like the Jedi and Sith. And this feels like it's taking that assumption and trying to twist it. It takes your assumption that Master Soul is good and well-meaning until you learn the truth and that he's not, and it feels like a twist because it's using the natural Star Wars methods of past, being that Jedi are good and twisting it. And I like that they did that a lot because the Jedi are not all good. They are like because if you strip away that kind of um I don't know, if you strip away what they do from like the language of Jedi, they're a group of people that that force you to lose all attachments to deprive yourself of any kind of attachment. And when you struggle with it, the answer is never to like discuss or open up. It's always to just you know,
Suppress.
you need to repress more. Like that is not a good thing. That is an awful thing for a
It's not
person
healthy.
to
Yeah.
do. It's not healthy for the individual at all. And that's what I think the show was trying to get across is like this idea of Jedi trying to just repress your feelings can number one, it's not sustainable because
Hmm.
like they were saying at the end, Master Soul, he was a good, kind, caring Jedi who did a bad thing. He did that thing because he wanted a Padawan so bad, but because he didn't just repress his feelings enough, it led to him to act on it. Whether you want to take that as you should just repress it more or talk about it, work through it, I think that's what the show is trying to point at, because we see that with Osha, she kept trying to repress and repress and repress, and it wasn't until like she learned the truth and she let out her emotion that she as a character found resolution, because she had been tortured mentally her entire life. And it wasn't until she could get out that emotion that she was able to have a full arc, to actually heal and to move on. And but through the language of Star Wars, she did that through an evil way, through the Sith. She achieved her character arc. She achieved the thing that was healthy through the Sith. And that's the thing I loved about this show, is it takes the assumption of Jedi good, Sith evil, and it bends it. It blurs it, because over repression of emotion is not healthy for any individual. And demanding that on especially young children, the fact that it's always young children who have to be trained to become Jedis, and that's the only
Hmm.
way you can. Because I mean, think about what they do. They take young children. Like when they found Osha, she was too old to be trained, so they have to take in little kids, force them to repress, 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 and only then can you be a Jedi. Like that's a cruel, to me, that's a cruel thing to do. And it's a very unhealthy thing. And I just appreciate the show taking that and like really talking about, wait, we've been saying these are the good guys when this is what they do.
Yeah. And I think that's like, because again, and if you go back to the old Star Wars, like, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, you don't really hear that. Like Yoda isn't telling Luke like how he's telling him you must control your emotions, but you don't really
Right.
get as much of the repression. I mean, you don't see them being taken as children. You don't see all of
Mhm.
that until the sequel trilogy. No, yeah, the sequel trilogy. No, prequel trilogy, where
Mhm.
you see the Jedi in the temple and you see what it's like to actually be raised as a Jedi. And so like, it brings a lot of questions because it's like, the idea is that like if you don't control your emotions, you will become a Sith Lord. You'll
Mhm.
turn to the dark side. And it's like at the same time, it's like I completely understand like the suppression of
Mhm.
emotions is not sustainable because like I said, the idea should be control rather than suppression. And you could tell the Jedi have
Sure.
always preached suppression. But at the
Right.
same time, it's like anytime someone stops suppressing, they just automatically become a Sith Lord killer and just start
Mhm.
murdering everybody. Like
Mhm.
Chimere, it's like, hey, so the alternative is you can repress your emotions, or you can be like Chimere and kill everybody. Or you can be
Mhm.
like OSHA and kill someone in cold blood. Again,
Mhm.
it's like so what do you do? Should you just abandon the force completely? Because it's like you either have this unhealthy suppression or you have this, well, if I don't suppress my emotions, I'm going to become a Sith Lord. And if I become a Sith Lord, I just automatically start killing everybody. And that's what
Mhm.
happens every time someone stops suppressing their emotions. So again, the idea,
Right.
and they can't really show that the Jedi have learned their lesson and that it should be more about control rather than
Right.
suppression because this is a prequel, right? So like
Right.
they haven't learned that lesson. So it'll be
Right.
interesting to
Because you,
see if
you
in
mentioned
2026, go
you
ahead.
mentioned like reform, and like you're absolutely right. This is like what this is High Republic era,
Hmm.
like Jedi temple and council. We don't see, like when you mentioned Yoda, Yoda is not using the vernacular of repress. He's using control, which is a much healthier attitude to have, because absolutely, like strong like lashes can be controlled, and that itself is not an unhealthy thing. That is the
Hmm.
opposite. It is a healthy thing to be able to control your emotions.
Yeah, and I think even the way like sometimes they'll preach control, but
Mhm.
control doesn't mean not talking about it. Control doesn't mean like they'll say like control your emotions by not talking about it. Like they don't use the vernacular of suppress, but it's like what you're
Right,
telling them to do to their emotions is suppress them. You're not telling
right,
them to control them because to control your emotions, you confront them, you
Right.
discuss them, and then you what's the right word? Either move on or manage or cope with them,
Right.
something like that.
Right.
So like even in, um the prequel trilogy,
Hmm.
like Obi-Wan was telling Anakin to control his emotions, but every
Hmm.
time he was, the way he was telling him really to suppress them, just using the word control on top. Like this is how you control them, by suppressing them. But that's not
Right.
how you control them. That's not how you control emotions. You control them by confronting them. It doesn't have to necessarily be like acceptance, like I accept that I'm angry. It can be. It just kind of depends on the person too. Like the Jedi just need
Sure.
therapists. That's what they need. They need
They're
a whole group of like force
honestly,
therapists to help
they're
them out.
they're like that. They're like those guys who get really into the philosophy of stoicism and take
Uh-huh.
it like way too far to be these like alpha dudes who are like, no, I can take it all. And it's like, no, dude, you need to see a therapist is what you
Yeah.
need right now.
Yeah.
It's
So
like it's
I
not normal to see like all of your coworkers just get slaughtered and then like, no, I'm fine. I okay, yeah, I'm good. No, you
yeah.
need to talk about it, man.
Right. And I'm like, I'm also trying to think because like there are a lot of rules for Jedi, like you can't attack someone that's unarmed or anything like
Right.
that. But I'm also like, because Kymir killed Cord while he was unarmed. Like they were both
Chimere,
unarmed. Kymir
Chimere.
killed Cord in episode 5, snapped his neck.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm like, I feel like Soul would have been justified in just killing Kymir because Kymir is literally a weapon. Like he proved he can kill someone without a weapon. But again, I guess he's pointing out that like, yeah, you've got so many rules. I don't have to live by them, so you can't kill me or otherwise you'll
Right.
break your own rules. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm
Was
like,
it he said you can't break a rule if you never
yeah,
follow it?
which is very interesting. But then it also kind of contradicts because it's like maybe that's part of like why Soul is haunted because he knows he broke the rule. But like if Soul really felt that rule was so important, why did he kill Osha's mom? Because like to me, if I'm thinking about when am I going to break a rule, am I going to do
Hmm.
it when a chick is turning into smoke, or am I going to break it when some guy slaughtered like 5 of my friends? Like it feels like as far as which opportunity to break a rule is, you know what I mean? It's like if you're
Hmm.
willing to do it when this chick was like turning into a force thing, smoke, but you're not willing to do it when this guy killed 5 of your friends, it's like when are you really following the rules? I don't know.
But
It's
I
part
think
of
that's the
the
thing for him is
convolution.
he broke it when he was feeling selfish. Like because he didn't have control over his emotion and instead he just tried to repress it. Like he killed when the thing that he wanted was in jeopardy. And
Mm,
that is I need to they used the term like I need to get these kids safe, but what he wanted was control. He wanted to control like those children because he wanted a Padawan. Because he wanted the idea of I can train one of these kids so much that I'm going to do whatever it takes for me to be in possession of these kids.
mm.
And so to me that's where I think the difference is because with what's his name? Kamir?
Chimere.
Chimere. With Chimere, I don't think he had any of that. Like he was just like, no, I can follow the code. Nothing conflicts with my own personal want. Whereas I think before that's it conflicted with
Mhm.
his personal want.
And
And
that's
that's why.
why, yeah, and I just think seeing like again, because and I think everything that you're saying, like how we're flipping the assumption of the Jedi, I think it would have continued to hammer home that assumption of like the Jedi are good. And it would have given us like if we saw them taking down a force cult and like Soul like successfully took them down and did the good Jedi thing and like took them down, like it would have we would have still walked away like, oh, that was the right decision. Soul is a good guy. Like, it would have kind of hammered home too that the Jedi are good. I guess it just I think that's part of like the because I know what you mean. Like they're using that assumption that you believe the Jedi are good and she's flipping it on its ear.
Mhm.
But I'm like, I just remember being so confused by the seeming obsession of
Mhm.
them because I think she could have showed why they were so obsessive over this and maintained that the Jedi are good.
Mhm.
Like make the audience think that the Jedi are good, but they're obsessive over this concept because like again, in a way, like being obsessive could have been good. Like if you're obsessive maybe you will are able to like if we saw how that obsession led them to taking down a dangerous force cult that was doing something bad, it
Hmm.
would have made more sense as to why they didn't listen, just acted and created such a huge stir. I'm also like, why did like we talked about it yesterday? I'm like, why did he think that like when this chick was turning into smoke, that
Yeah, why
his
do you?
lightsaber was gonna be effective? I'm like,
Yeah, I don't really get that either.
like when something's on fire, does he just like swipe at the fire with his lightsaber? Like to put out the smoke? Uh,
But I
but
think
yeah, I see what you mean.
they're not trying to redeem the Jedi here. Like I
No,
think
no, no,
the
no.
point that they're trying to make is like we don't need another example of the Jedi being good because that's literally all of Star Wars canon.
Exactly.
Like that's
Hmm.
everything that Star Wars has been. So we don't need a scene of them like using that, using that obsessiveness itself to achieve a good goal because I feel like they're trying to say that the obsessiveness is coming from a lack of control. The obsessiveness itself is the problem. Whether used for good or bad, it's still unhealthy. Like
Hmm.
whether you stop an evil serial killer from blowing like killing like a whole town of people or you use it for your own selfish gain, it still hurts you in the end. And that's the thing that we get from OSHA is that it is what's the term, like you can't, it's unsustainable. Like that kind of obsession is unsustainable regardless of how it's used. And so the answer is to not just suppress it like the Jedi have been doing. And that's why I think they don't want to show a scene like that because they like we've had enough of Jedi
Jedi
using this
being
for
good.
good
Yeah.
in the past. Like we need to just show what we're trying to show. Now, I think they still do it messily. Like again, like
Yeah, it creates a mess. Yeah.
as much
Yeah.
as I'm standing up for it, that this is all just because this is something that I've kind of wanted from Star Wars for a long
Hmm.
time and something that I really connected me with it. I still think as a whole, it's a kind of a sloppy beast of a show.
It's like the concept itself is cool.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I almost wish that they said it 1,000 years before the beginning of the Phantom Menace, because
Hmm.
I'm still wondering about the lore. I'm still wondering about how the lore fits in because 100 years ago is not that long ago. Like that still affects, like Yoda is obviously alive.
Hmm.
Darth Plagueis is there.
Hmm.
Um, how do Chimera and May fit into the Sith rule of two? Because the Sith rule of two have been going on since Darth Bane.
Yeah.
So it's still like while trying to get away from Star Wars lore, you're still in Star Wars lore because you're only 100 years before Palpatine is about to become a Padawan at some point, like because he's been along for a long time. He might already be the if we saw Darth Plagueis, Palpatine might
Right.
already be his apprentice.
Well, and that's a thing too. I think that's not just with the Acolyte. That's what like Star Wars has been retconning its own like rules since the beginning. Like the whole thing with what are they called? Inquisitors? Like, how are those not like Padawan? That breaks the Sith rule of two. Like, because you have Palpatine and you have Darth Vader, and then you have all of these
Sith
like
Inquisitors,
the
yeah.
Sith Inquisitors who are using lightsabers and Force powers, but they're not Sith, yet they're Sith Like you're just trying to
Yeah.
find vernacular to get around this thing that George Lucas said on a whim 30 years ago. And now you have to like, oh God, we gotta rewrite the whole
Well, because
canon
you're like, I
to
want my
like make it
characters,
work and
yeah, and you're like, I want my characters to fight Sith and kill
right.
them. And it's
Because
like, well, you only have two Sith to choose from, so you can't like kill them. You can't just kill Darth Vader over and over again. You know what I mean? Like, you
right.
gotta. So, Inquisitors, we have Inquisitors now.
Right. We have to
It just feels like it's like literally we just need fodder for the Jedi to kill, like, or to fight
right. We
lightsabers with.
we need bad guy for good guy to fight.
Yeah. So I guess that's probably true because the Inquisitors doesn't really fit into, I guess, like I don't even know the way they explain it because you don't really see how they're like not as powerful as like Darth Sidious and Darth Vader. Like you just kind of
Like the
assume that they're not, but they
because like
can
what
do
were
all the same things.
weren't they like Padwans or Jedi Knights during
Yeah.
the
A lot of them are
whole
former
thing?
Jedi.
Right.
Hmm.
So it's like skilled in the how is this different from the Sith rule of two? And that's why like I don't pay that to just personally like
Hmm.
it all none of this was ever intended. Like when George Lucas was writing this, like
It wasn't supposed to become
he
this thing.
didn't intend this all of this. He wrote this and then he wrote this and then everyone else came in and added this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's like in a way it's cool because it shows how like one idea can grow so much, but at the same time it's
Sure.
like you also got to connect it. And like it's cool when it falls into place. Like to me, the idea that like again, did Darth Plagueis, I think it makes more sense if Darth Plagueis learned this technique maybe from the witches of this Force Coven. Some people are theorizing that Darth Plagueis made the witches think they created the life. And I'm like, that feels very messy. I'm like, I feel like it makes more sense if Darth Plagueis learns how to do this from the witches and
Hmm.
teaches it to Sidious, and it could well because Plagueis is dead by the time Anakin is conceived. So yeah, if he teaches it to Sidious and then Sidious does it with Anakin to help fulfill the prophecy, so that way the Sith can like again control. Like that's really cool to me, and I think that's a way that the connected universe can kind of work, and like how it's cool to like bring it together. But like I
Right.
said, then when you think about things like the rule of two, and now you have Chimere and Osha, and sure, like maybe Osha's an inquisitor. I
Right.
don't know. But Chimere didn't seem like he had a master.
Yeah, maybe the rule of two only applies to like prophecy related things. Like when we're dealing with the prophecy, there could only be two, but you could also have other.
And I mean, again, the rule of two was created because the Sith kept killing each other.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
that was the Darth Bane, and he was like by combining all the Sith together, we'll be stronger because there'll be like I guess less dark side to like tap into.
yeah.
There's a lot that goes into it. But again, like yes, like it did. It's weird because like it feels like it left us with a lot of questions. I won't necessarily call like I hate plot holes and continuity issues.
Yeah, that's a big
Like
thing for
it's a
you,
huge thing
right?
for me. That's why like Obi-Wan Kenobi fell so flat for me because
Hmm.
I can't get past all of the stupid continuity errors that just don't make any sense. They don't fit with the lore, they don't fit with the TV show. I feel like this TV show, like it didn't really have like plot and continuity errors. It just gave me so many unanswered questions that I feel like are never going to get answered. Like for like why does Osha want to be a Jedi in the first place? Why was
Right.
she
When she
so
learned about
intent?
them.
Yeah, and it's like I can understand like a child not wanting to be like their parent, like no kid, no dad, I'm gonna do something different. But that's because children have the internet and they can go to school and they learn about different things. But if you're raised in a force cult with all these people, your aunts, only aunts I guess on there, aunt, mother, everyone is telling you the Jedi are evil. You're like,
Hmm.
are they?
Are they
Mm.
though?
And not even like, are they? You're like, no, I'm gonna be one.
Right. It's like it's conviction to the point of like ostracizate. I can't say that word. Of
Ostracism.
being yeah, of being ostracized. Like she's so like
Like I
dug
will
her
leave
heels,
all of you.
and it's like we see in that it's very quick, but like the scene where in the second flashback episode we see May taking her journal and it has like the symbol of the Republic on it, which I thought personally I thought that was like her personal journal, not necessarily like a book on the Republic and the Jedi, but like maybe that's what it was. But even still, like, how did she hear about this if she was
Yeah.
created in this coven? Like,
And like I'm like, did Darth Plagueis like tell her that the Jedi are good? And she's like, no, the Jedi are good because the man in my dreams told me that they are. Even though like that still doesn't make sense because you still have 30 people telling you that something is evil and bad. And it just does not make sense as to why. Like you could see her like being curious, but again,
mhm,
that like and again, that's a question that we're never going to get answered. And it's kind of like it makes it hard. Like when you have stuff like that, it can kind of make it can make it hard to believe because it's like, okay, this is kind of the premise that the entire show is based off of. Like we don't really have a good reason as to why Osha becomes a Jedi or wants to become a Jedi so much, but she kind of has to for the entire plot of the entire show to actually occur. So we're
mhm.
just not gonna talk about it.
Yeah.
and that can kind of like again it can lower the credibility. I don't think the most interesting part of the show was the twins in the first place, so that's why I don't think it like lowers the show that much for me because it seems like a small thing, but again, it's one of those things that's like if you like look at it, everything else falls apart because it's like if there's no reason for Osha to want to become a Jedi because there's not, like the entire plot of the show, you either have to rewrite the entire show
Hmm.
or everything just falls apart because her becoming a Jedi is part of this entire thing. And it's like,
Right.
did no one just like sit and ask, like, so what? Like, I can't wait to watch the pitch meeting on this because they're gonna be like, yeah, Osha's gonna become a Jedi and she's really excited. And he's gonna be like, oh, why does she want to be a Jedi? Because the Jedi are good. Well, wasn't she raised on a Force coven and they all told her that the Jedi are bad? Yep. And like her sister tells her that she's willing to kill her because the sister believes that the Jedi are so bad. So if they're both raised in the same spot, why does one sister think the Jedi are so evil and the other thinks they're so good? Especially if they're the same person.
Person. Yeah.
He's just gonna be like, "Hey, shut up!" Like he does the. Oh, I love the pitch meeting so much. But anyway, so
It
I think
doesn't
that
make
just kind of it's like I said, there are like to me, like if I'm ranking, but despite all of this, like people that are like, this is the worst thing Star Wars has ever released. Did you not watch the Book of Boba Fett, or did you just forget that it happened? Because like, despite all the issues with this show, and it has issues, it wasn't the Book of Boba Fett. That was
I
just a mess.
I think some people just watched the original trilogy and then watched the Acolyte and was like, this thing
I'm like, what the
sucks.
heck is that? It's like, okay, if you did that, then I'm not surprised that you feel that way.
Yeah, that
Okay, like
probably
I
is
get
the
it.
worst Star Wars you've seen, man.
Yeah,
But like,
definitely.
there's some real trash out there.
Yeah. There's real trash out there because again,
If
despite these issues, it still had interesting concepts to build on. Like I said, episode 5 to me was the best episode. I mean, and because again, it's really hard to take lightsaber choreography to the next step because it's like, okay, lightsaber is like a sword fight with a glow stick and it looks cool, but it can only look so cool for so long before it's just the same thing over and over and over again.
Yes. And if we can just like dwell on that for a second, the lightsaber fights in episode 5 and then episode 8, between Kamir and Soul, amazing. Some of
They
the
right, yeah.
best and most fun. I'm not sure if you, I don't know about you. Quick little story. I grew up with Star Wars, obviously, but also with Star Wars video games. And
Hmm.
something that I've loved about Star Wars games is that they let you use the Force in ways that you would never see on like in a movie. Like you could never see because there was too much like build up to the fights and it was never like as action packed as you may necessarily want. It felt more thematic with the duel, like a fencing duel, more
Hmm.
than like this all out like two wizards going at it with crazy like powers. This show went all out. Like the end with Kamir using like throwing his lightsaber out and like them using the force to deflect it and straight up like headbutting uh lightsabers. It was, I
Cortosis.
don't know,
Hmm.
it was untamed, it was raw. There were total, especially in the last episode, I got really big Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon vibes from like the scene where like they jump out of the window and like you can tell they're both being like suspended as they like fall in this like
Hmm.
graceful slow-mo. It's straight out of like classic martial arts movies and it was amazing. I wish we saw this level of choreography in some like more Star Wars properties because it felt like continuous takes. They weren't like overly edited and like quick shot. Like it felt like we sat on it. We had different angles to play with what would show up the most interesting with the scenes. If you hate that, dude, I just don't think you like Star Wars at this point
Yeah,
because this
like
is some of the best action that Star Wars has put out from a lightsaber to lightsaber perspective.
I mean, the lightsaber fights in this were far better than like in Ahsoka, you know?
Mhm.
Like, and to me, they rivaled Revenge of the Sith. And just because, and like again, it got so like the show is actually surprisingly dark, which also kind of like highlights some of the tonal issues because again,
Yeah.
in like episode 4, we go from like her asking whether like talking about like this
like the
talking
little,
beaver looking pig thing.
yeah,
And I'm like, and then
the
they go
weasel
to
man, and then
the Weasel Man, and then the next episode, Chimera is brutally murdering a child. And it's like, tonally, did we need the Weasel Man in the show at all? Does he do anything? Because yeah, I cannot stand it when people put comic relief in stuff that's not actually funny.
mm-hmm.
Like the show didn't make me laugh at all, which is fine. I don't
No.
need to laugh at everything. You could just take all that stuff out and that will help me take the show more seriously. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I think the lightsaber fights definitely rivaled Revenge of the Sith. I mean, you can tell me that they didn't, and I would need like you to explain how they didn't. And
Mm-hmm.
someone brought up a good point that like, even when Kymer was like cutting through all those Jedi, they were like some of the Jedi, like you could see in the background, they were just like waving their lightsabers around and like they weren't really hitting anybody. And they
Mm-hmm.
were like, it kind of showed that like, well, like, it kind of seemed like dumb, like kind of like how like the stormtroopers like don't always shoot, or like there's like a scene in Batman The Dark Knight
Sure.
where like he's fighting a bunch of like bad guys and it looks awesome because he's like just killing them, like hitting them, but then there's like guys like standing in the background just like staring at him, not doing anything. It
Right.
is like, okay, it's not as cool as it seems. Like you can't actually take on this many people. But we
Right.
actually do get an explanation for it because Horde literally says that like fighting Chimera is so hard because first of all, he doesn't obey the rules of combat, but secondly, because he gets in your head and he stays there. So
Mm-hmm.
like those Jedi who were just waving their lightsabers around, not hitting anything,
Mm-hmm.
he could have been projecting like an illusion of him and they thought they were fighting him and they weren't, which is why they couldn't help him. They couldn't help their Jedi friends while he slaughtered the other ones. So
Right.
like it actually made sense and it actually had like a good reason for it. And that force deprivation helmet allowed him to not allow the Jedi into his head so he could do whatever he wanted to their heads. Um,
Right.
and so like to me, that explanation completely holds up. And I really loved how we were able to see because like in Star Wars movies, you don't see it as much of like certain Jedi are have more skills than others. Like again,
Mm-hmm.
Mace Windu is very, very strong with the Force. With the pod
Right.
is his certain like he's very close to the dark side, but he's very strong with it. We don't
Mm-hmm.
see that at all. Not even a little bit. You cannot tell that Mace Windu is a good Force user because he
Mm-hmm.
never uses it
He never
in
let him
movie.
use it. He
They
never
never
give him a
let him use it.
situation to use it.
And like, and then all we see is that he's a good lightsaber fighter. Like he's good with his lightsaber. And like in compared to Obi-Wan and Anakin, when they're fighting, Obi-Wan is known for being the best swordsman in the galaxy, perhaps the best swordsman Jedi ever. With
Mm-hmm.
his that's what he's supposed to be. Like he's known for his style of Jedi is a defensive style, and it's known for being good with the lightsaber.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it kind of feels like in Revenge of the Sith, those fights should have been reversed because Obi-Wan was doing force feats that were on par with Anakin's. And it's like we really should have been seeing Mace Windu doing the crazy force feats, like when they were like had their hands like pressed up together, Obi-Wan and Anakin, and like everything was like breaking around them. And it's like we
Right.
probably more should have seen that with Mace Windu and Palpatine, because again, that's supposed to be Mace Windu's thing, and
He's
Obi-Wan's
supposed
thing
to
is supposed to
be
be good sword fight. But anyway, I say all that to
right.
say you could tell that Soul, like his thing was hand-to-hand combat. He was the best hand-to-hand combatant out of everybody. But he wasn't
Right.
as good of a lightsaber duelist as Chimere and maybe even
Mm-hmm.
some of the other Jedi, because every time Chimere would knock his lightsaber out of his hand, like Chimere got the edge on him multiple times with his lightsaber. But
Mm-hmm.
whenever he did that, Soul would switch to hand-to-hand combat and Chimere couldn't keep up with his movements. And it was cool to
Yeah.
see that like little like that's taking time in your choreography, you know what I mean? And like
Right.
even when May was fighting Soul, like you could tell she didn't have a chance. Soul was like literally just like trying, he was literally stalling basically. Like
Mm-hmm.
he was just effortlessly dodging, like he knew everything she was about to do, because again you could tell that his skill lies in hand-to-hand combat, and it was really cool watching him switch to hand-to-hand combat to defeat to fight Chimere.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the show does a lot of good stuff well. Like you can't look at this show and say it doesn't do anything well.
Yeah.
I can't see it. Like there's a lot of people that um love Andor. I'm not going to talk about the people that maybe don't love Andor.
I have
Um
not yet seen it. but
Oh, okay, okay.
I probably know I will love it when I do see
Oh
it.
yeah. Like if you like Rogue One, you love Andor. That's just
Mhm,
basic. If you think Rogue One is the best Star Wars movie, Andor will be your best Star Wars TV show.
mhm,
And but even for people that don't like it, they're like, it still does some things well. They're just kind of like, it's just not really for me, or like it didn't really capture me as well.
mhm,
Um, and I'm like Book of Boba Fett, I can't even say it did anything well because like the best parts about the show, Boba Fett wasn't in. Like the best
mhm,
parts
mhm.
about the show were The Mandalorian 2.5. And it's
Right,
like you can't like that's not Boba Fett, that's The Mandalorian. So
right.
like those episodes belonged in season two. So and again, like Ahsoka has like I loved it. It's like Rebels season five, but it also still had its flaws.
Mhm,
So I think I don't know, like it's a pretty comprehensive view of the Acolyte. Um, from like if I had to rank like Star Wars shows, to me it fits right in the middle. Like if I'm just talking about like live action Star Wars shows, Mandalorian is number one, and then
mhm,
probably Ahsoka, and then to me the Acolyte, and Obi-Wan, and then Book of Boba Fett. Because
mhm,
again, in Obi-Wan, I can't like there's nothing in the Acolyte that's so bad that is worse than Darth Vader staring at Obi-Wan, the man he's wanted to kill for 15 years, and not doing so because there was some fire in front of him.
mhm.
There's nothing. Darth Vader was burned alive,
Dude could put
still
out a
trying to
fight.
kill him.
His legs are metal. They wouldn't even catch.
He could just force Obi-Wan over to him through, like he could literally force
He could
drag
have
Obi-Wan
forced
through
him
the
into the
fire.
fire, and that would have been like
Exactly
great
what he did.
revenge.
Right. And he just, oh no, I can't. Obi-Wan, he got away because of the fire.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing in the Acolyte that's as bad as that. I am sorry. I am so
Mhm,
sorry if you feel differently. Even Osha's plot hole about why she wants to become a Jedi.
mhm.
There's nothing as bad as
Yeah.
watching that. My eyes were bleeding with
Mhm.
pain of what is going on. And then Obi-Wan just not killing Darth Vader at the end when he had the chance. I can't reconcile how that's not worse. So,
Yeah. I think if this does get a season two, I think it needs to, and this is an impossible ask, but try not to be a Disney show. Like,
yeah.
please do your best to, and I have no idea what goes into the creative control that Disney has over its showrunners. I imagine a lot of that is not up to them. It is up to Disney pulling like the strings for final say of this show. So I'm sure that is out of control. But at the very least, make your episodes better self-contained and
Mhm.
and focus, tighten up your focus.
Exactly.
Don't be so out here when your story is here.
You don't need to
You don't
be.
need to set up other like narrative plots for other
Mhm.
series. Other You're a prequel, you're out of the way of everything else. Don't try to set up like force dyads. Don't try to set up like an origin for Darth Plagueis or how the Sith got restarted or anything. We don't care. Okay? Just tell a good story. Stay focused. And you had the core of it here. You flopped. You just got so sloppy with it that it didn't come out as right. If you tighten that focus, you could have
Yep.
something real special as its own thing on your hand.
I think you're right. I think that kind of just sums up the show. Like if I had to sum it up, I would just say unfocused because
Mm-hmm.
you introduced all these mysteries
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't tie up half of them. And
Yeah.
when you introduced a new mystery, you looked like you were about to answer it, and instead you just introduced a new one,
Right.
which just like it can work, but if those mysteries are huge plot holes, it doesn't work. Like
Right.
there's no such thing as like it's so mysterious it's good. No, that is not a thing. That is not a thing. It's so mysterious, it's unfocused. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, I don't think it's going to end up getting a season two because people are just hating it so much.
Yeah,
I,
the vitriol thrown at it, the
yeah,
undeserved vitriol is very sad to see on display, but not honest unfortunate to say it's not really that surprising considering the fan group that
yeah,
talks
yeah.
about Star Wars.
And again, it's like there's legitimate complaints, and there's a lot of people that, the Jedi are beloved, and they really don't want to see them depicted this way because, these are their childhood heroes. Like when they were kids, they wanted to grow up and become Jedi.
Hmm.
And so like I think in a way, I think the show could have done a better job of at least understanding that. Um, and maybe like, kind of working, not like, again, part of it is like being let down so hard by the Jedi, but like, you could have let them down like a little gentler, I guess, if you wanted to, maybe, but that would have all been fan service. It wouldn't have really necessarily improved the story. In some ways it could have, but it probably would have been fan service. But again, when you have fans, you do have to do like there is an element of service in there because you want them to coming back, because some of those things that they're not getting is why it's being torn apart and probably why it's not going to end up getting a season two. um but again, like to me, all the review bombing of it just like I like there are legitimate complaints out there, legitimate, but not enough to be 13% on Rotten Tomatoes. This is not the worst Star Wars show
Yeah, and
by a
I
long
don't
shot.
think with a fan base that I'm not trying to say they're all like this, but with a large and or at the very least a such loud uh portion of a fan base that's
Hmm.
dedicated to such hate, there is no way to work. There's no pleasing those group of people because let's not forget these are the same group of people that when The Last Jedi came out, they bullied Kelly Marie Tran so
That was
hard it
horrible.
caused her such mental anguish that she had to like leave social media for such a long time and like reconsider acting as a career because they didn't like a woman and they
An
didn't like
Asian woman.
what she was doing in the show. They didn't like her character. Like that's the kind of vitriol. Like there's no pleasing that. Like they're going to hate no matter what. So I
And
think
like,
that
yeah,
ignore
yeah,
them entirely. You don't need them. Nobody needs them.
exactly. Like listen to us. Because like I hated The Last Jedi. I hated it, and my brother loved it. And I thought it was terrible. But I also didn't start bullying the main actress into like severe mental anguish. Like I can't respect somebody like that who's like, I hate this movie so much because of this character, and now I'm going to, it's like, you don't have an opinion. That's not an
Yeah.
opinion. Like I hated it because the way that the story was going in two different directions. Like there's legitimate criticisms of The Last Jedi.
You can
None of
criticize
that.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no justification though for doing that to somebody. And I also hope that like if they get a season two, like please, Kathleen Kennedy and Leslye Headland, again, there are legitimate things to fix. This is not like a, hey, anyone
Mhm.
that hates the show, there's nothing like the, please like
There are
fix
very
some
genuine
things.
criticisms that we
Yes.
have with this show. The bigotry and the racist hate
You can ignore that.
towards
Yeah.
it is far from anything that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, not even close. Not even close. But yeah, there are things to fix. But again, we'll just have to see if a season two comes. I wouldn't bet money on it.
I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah.
And it's a shame because I can imagine interesting things done with it. But
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, I would still watch a season two. Now, like, if the issues from season one got worse in season two, I probably wouldn't come back for three. But there's enough for me to want to come back for two to see if maybe they did some things better.
mhm,
But oh well, that'll probably
time
be it.
will tell.
Hmm. So thank you for following us for our review of The Acolyte. Feel free to leave your thoughts below. I mean, what did you think of it as a TV show? Writing, pacing, all of that kind of stuff. If you think there should be a season two, if you would want to see it, or if you think it's just a failed experiment.
Mhm.
And
Until
until
next
next
time,
time. Oh, what do we have next? Quiet Place Day
Quiet
One
Place
is
Day One.
coming next. Can't wait to go see this movie. I'm gonna go see it tomorrow. Can't wait.
Hold your
It's gonna be
breath.
awesome. Huh? Oh yeah. Hold your breath. Have you
Hold
seen
your
it yet
breath.
or not yet?
I haven't seen it yet,
Haven't seen it
but
yet? Okay.
I
Yeah,
hope
yeah,
to very soon.
yeah. Can't wait. And then, man, Deadpool. Okay, sorry. One thing I have to mention at the end of this. Did you see
Classic
the?
Will and Ty.
I
It's like, oh,
know it hasn't
wait,
really
hold on.
ended yet.
One more thing.
It's because we're talking about the Acolyte, and Daphne Keene, I thought did I don't think they gave her much to work with her character. It was cool to see her defeat May like with hand-to-hand combat. And again, that
Mhm,
kind of goes back to what I was saying, how you could tell that Soul was a master of hand-to-hand combat, and he obviously taught that to Jackie, who was his Padawan, which is why she was able to defeat May in a way that other Jedi couldn't.
mhm,
This is why she ended up beating her hand to hand.
mhm,
But I say all that to say, like Daphne Keene, should be she did an excellent job because the latest Deadpool and Wolverine trailer revealed her in the movie, and there was speculation for months because again she played X-23 in Logan, the little girl with the claws.
mhm,
And there was speculation for months that she was going to be in it. And literally on the premiere of the Acolyte, they were like, "So, are you in Deadpool and Wolverine?" And she was like, "No." She was like, "It would have been a great experience to work with Hugh Jackman again, but maybe another time. Sean Levy's great." She like just straight up denied it. Like
mhm.
whatever people asked her, she was like, "No, I'm not in it, but it would have been great." And I'm like, respect, respect. She just they're like, "Do not tell anyone till we release the final trailer," and that's exactly what she did, and that
Right.
is not easy. So, respect in my book. And that helps a lot for the hype of Deadpool and Wolverine. So we'll just have to see that when it comes out. But anyway, next up is A Quiet Place Day One. Leave us your thoughts about the Acolyte, and this will actually
Yes.
be the conclusion of the episode this time. Um, so yeah, we'll talk to you guys next time.
Until the next time.